how the search went and who was all involved and in the searching and stuff, and how things could have been better.
Tonight, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women hear families want more from police investigations.
If there is going to be a request, then we would have to share that with our partners.
Meanwhile, the two Indigenous Affairs ministries say it's not just their call if the inquiry would get an extension.
It is highly unusual to have witness after witness, in fact, Crown witness after Crown witness, testify about the good character.
And the Thunder Bay Chief of Police is cleared of charges. Good evening, I'm Brittany Hobson. The National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls is wrapping up hearings in Yellowknife today. Families are speaking towards issues surrounding the way missing loved ones are handled. Our reporter Charlotte Mork-Jacobs spoke with one of those families.
To tell her story and to talk about how the search went and who was all involved and in the searching and stuff, and how things could have been better.
Frida Cardinal has more questions than answers. Her sister Stella was just 19 years old when she disappeared without a trace. Stella was 6 months pregnant and visiting friends at a cabin near Fort Smith in the NWT. Like many families testifying at the MMIWG inquiry, Frida is speaking out on how the RCMP handled the case.
My dad had to hear it on the streets of Fort Smith. My mom had to go to Father Menez in Fort Resolution to get information, and so on and so forth. And the searching, they left out a lot of detail, stuff they could have investigated further, but never did. They were witnessed, like when they had searched, these witnesses said when they were on the search, some had seen blood on a wooden bed, some had seen wet, bloody towels in the garbage nearby. Some had seen blood on trees that were nearby as well.
Frida says RCMP also did not take a search dog to the cabin where Stella was last seen. Frida shared how an inquest into her death ruled that she was presumed dead and no foul play was suspected.
About 40 people were interviewed to find out what possibly happened.
Right.
And this was all without there ever being a body or your sister found.
Right. Not even a piece of item that belonged to her. Nothing.
Along with recommendations of utilizing groups that know the land, such as the Canadian Rangers for searches, Frida also hopes that the inquiry can bring change to investigations into missing persons.
Getting an independent investigative unit or a group anyway to open cases and work on them, investigate the details and the stuff that they left out and didn't pursue in the case.
Community hearings will wrap up today in Yellowknife, and for Frida Cardinal, sharing the story of Stella is all part of the healing process.
I've done some of my work that I always wanted to do, and I feel a whole lot better about everything right now, and it's just, there'll never be closure, but, and I'll never get answers.
Charlotte Mork-Jacobs, APTN National News, Yellowknife.
Commissioners also heard from Cindy Allen, who testified on behalf of her grandmother, Mary Adele Doctor. Doctor was assaulted in her home in 2009 and later died in hospital. Allen said more should be done to preserve the Dene culture, including respecting elders.
The justice system right now is failing us, failing Indigenous people, Dene people. And it's profound in the violence and the harm that's going on in our communities that people turned a blind eye to because they don't want to speak badly about others and they don't want to say anything. There's a code of silence that goes on in our communities. And we have to break that code of silence and speak our truth and bring our teachings back.
As we near the end of January, the federal government says it still hasn't received a formal request for an extension from the National Inquiry. Chief Commissioner Marion Buller previously stated that the request would come before the end of 2017. Commissioners have spoken about the need for a 2-year extension to the inquiry that is currently slated to wrap up at the end of this year. Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, Carolyn Bennett, says adding more time to the inquiry is not just a federal government decision.
This is not a decision that would be taken by me or just our cabinet. There are orders in council in all of the provinces and territories, and that they are with us in order to have a fully national public inquiry. And so this, if there is going to be a request, then we would have to share that with our partners in this really important work to stop this national tragedy.
And we would like to hear what you have to say about this or any other story. Here's how to contact us. Send an email to news@aptn.ca, like our APTN National News Facebook page, follow us on Twitter @APTN News, or go to our website, aptnnews.ca. The ongoing child welfare crisis is the focus of a 2-day so-called emergency meeting in Ottawa. Hundreds of people gathered today to come up with ways to reverse the high rates of apprehensions and the overrepresentation of Indigenous kids in care. But as Dennis Ward reports, not everyone is convinced a conference is going to solve the problems.
The goal of dramatically reducing the number of Indigenous youth in the child welfare system is not new, nor are meetings like this to address the crisis.
We know that many parents and grandparents, advocates and frontline workers have used many desperate words over the years to describe the situation facing the children. Since the 1970s, countless Indian child welfare task forces have been convened and reports have been written, but still we're here.
Many of the reasons for the overrepresentation are well known: a lack of proper housing, intergenerational trauma, and poverty.
We have a basic median income gap of approximately $70,000 in our communities. So then it is no wonder that virtually all of the children in care within Inuit Nunangat are Inuit.
There has been some criticism that this is just another meeting, but some here are feeling optimistic this time around, in part because they believe the various levels of government are now listening.
It's not like we don't know what's wrong and we don't know what to fix it and we don't know how to do it and we need hand-holding. I think that people have a misconception and a stereotype about who we are as an Indigenous community. We have been caring for our families pre-contact.
The federal government has a 6-point plan of action that includes shifting the focus from apprehension to prevention and trying to keep children connected to their families and culture. But don't expect an improved child welfare system by the time this conference comes to an end.
It's taken us generations to get to this system. You heard people talking about these kinds of meetings having taken place way back into the 1970s, but the political will is here.
Minister Philpott says an unspecified amount of money will be in the next budget. Not good enough, says the federal NDP, who say there is already a $155 million a year gap.
The federal government will pay when children are put into foster care, when they're taken from their children, taken from their families, but they will not put the funds on the ground in the communities. The Manitoba report talks about this turning children into commodities. I mean, this has been the story of Canada.
The emergency meeting comes to an end on Friday, which is the second anniversary of the landmark ruling by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, which agreed Canada was discriminating against First Nations children. Marks 2 years since the tribunal ordered the Government of Canada to end that inequality. Dennis Ward, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Continuing in Ottawa, some who have spent their entire careers working in the child welfare system say for the first time they have some hope going into the meetings. With more on that, here's Dennis Ward.
Thanks. We're here with Diane Redsky, who is the Executive Director at MMIWG in Winnipeg, and also sitting on a committee that's looking at changes to legislation in Manitoba for the Child Welfare Act. Diane, a little on what you heard from the Minister and everyone this morning, and does it give you some hope?
Oh, absolutely. I think this is probably the first time in my entire career of working in the child welfare industry that there is some hope. And there is some action, some tangible, practical things in gathering people together. The fact that there are 350 delegates here from across Canada that are working specifically on the issue of child welfare speaks a lot to where the federal government wants to make some investments and wants to hear from experts in the field on what needs to change, because it's only getting worse. It's not getting any better.
Dan, as I mentioned, these meetings have been going on for 3-4 decades. What is it about this one that's giving you that hope?
I think because we're actually looking at changing law and shifting power and making policy that is actually going to be, that are going to work for First Nation communities, for Métis people and for Inuit people, and that we are seen more as equal partners rather than the people over there making the rules that we have to follow. We're actually now engaged in the process, and that is a big difference and a big shift than historically. And if you just take a look at Manitoba, putting together a child welfare legislative review committee where 5 of the 7 members are Indigenous and come from all backgrounds, including a community perspective, which represents the Mama-Wichita Center, and the political organizations, looking at what kind of child welfare laws do we need that are actually going to work, and let's get rid of the ones that don't.
Dan, appreciate you giving us some time here, and we'll let you get back in there and send it back to the studio.
Thank you.
The Alberta Child Intervention Panel has released 26 recommendations to the provincial government to improve the child intervention system. Some of the recommendations include having a more diverse workforce in the child welfare system and giving the provincial child advocate more authority. The panel wants a government public action plan in place by June 30th. 237 youth and young adults have died in the Alberta child intervention system in the last decade.
And I'm happy to say that we considered very carefully the Indigenous, family, client, academic, and stakeholder perspectives. And I feel that the way that the recommendations are put forward, that it will be a very positive step in the right direction to reconciliation.
After the break, we're headed to Ontario, where personal artifacts have been discovered on the grounds of a former residential school. But before that, here's a preview of tonight's episode of Nation to Nation.
Here's what's coming up on Nation to Nation. Day 1 of the emergency meeting on Indigenous Child and Family Services is over. I talked to a couple of stakeholders to get their view on if the meeting will change anything. Deputy Grand Chief of the Anishinaabe Nation and Ontario's Minister of Child and Family Services both joined me in our Ottawa studio. As well, I talked to Nunavut Senator Dennis Patterson. He wants Parliament to take Arctic issues more seriously with a new committee. That's coming up right after the national news.
Here's a look at Friday's weather forecast starting on the East Coast. -10 in Halifax and Charlottetown, -8 in Fredericton, sunny skies and -15 for Cartwright, -10 in La Grande, -13 in Quebec, cloudy and -5 in Val-d'Or, 0 in North Bay, sunny and +7 in Windsor and Sarnia, -2 in Timmins, a snowy -6 in Big Trout Lake. Heading to northern Manitoba, -15 in Flin Flon, -13 in the Pas, snowy and -4 in Barons River, -5 in Brandon. Over to Saskatchewan, -8 in Regina, -12 in North Battleford, -16 in Buffalo Narrows, a chilly -23 in Stony Rapids. Welcome back. Not guilty. The chief of police in Thunder Bay said he's relieved after charges against him were dismissed today. Willow Fiddler was at the courthouse this morning. She tells us what unfolded.
The courtroom broke into applause when the decision was read. Chief of Police J.P. Levesque not guilty on both charges of obstructing justice and breach of trust. Justice Bonnie Workington said the Crown failed to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Levesque intended to interfere with an investigation into the city's mayor. Back in December of 2016, RCMP informed Levesque someone had come forward with allegations of extortion against Keith Hobbs. Levesque then went and told Hobbs and other city officials. During his trial, Levesque said he was protecting the best interests of the city, fearing backlash from the mayor and general public if the investigation was to be leaked. The Thunder Bay has been called a city in crisis following the student inquest and tragic deaths of Tammy Kiash, Josiah Begg, and Barbara Kentner, just to name a few. And while the Crown tried to prove that Levesque put himself above the law, in the end, it was his character that tipped the scales of justice.
It is highly unusual to have witness after witness, in fact, Crown witness after Crown witness, testify about the good character, the honesty and integrity of the defendant. That happened in this case. It happened in this case because J.P. Levesque is an exceptional person.
Levesque has been on suspension since he was charged last May. He said he looks forward to returning to work.
Grateful and relieved. It's been a difficult year on myself and my entire family and a whole bunch of friends who are excellent supporters and this community. The support I received from within this community has just been incredible. So I'd just like to thank everybody.
The police board meets on Friday. Charges against Mayor Keith Hobbs are still before the courts. Willow Fiddler, APTN National News, Thunder Bay.
Tomorrow on APTN Investigates, the children taken away. John Murray talks to survivors of the 60s scoop ahead of the incoming settlement from the federal government. Here's a preview.
So how does a system meant to protect children from harm end up doing so much damage?
I think one of the factors might be we have this sort of newly developed profession of social work. Most of the social workers are white, upper middle class professionals from a very Euro-Canadian influenced worldview, encountering Indigenous populations that are not only in disarray but come from a really different sort of history and worldview. And so I think that lots of unchecked bias running rampant, right? So boom, lots of kids in care.
And I think that's why that social worker I interviewed sort of was in tears, because she understood 20 years too late. She came with a cultural bias about what the appropriate circumstances were to raise kids. It's not her fault. That's the way social workers were trained in those days. It may even still be today to some extent.
Race was a concern for some agencies.
For one family, the agency actually had 2 waiting lists. And they had been on the waiting list for 2 years. And then they finally approached the social worker and said, "We're still waiting here. Like, what's happening?" And the social worker said, "Oh, did I not tell you about the 2 lists? We put you on the list for a Caucasian child, but if we would have put you on the list for a Native child, we could have you set up by tomorrow."
The full story airs tomorrow, right after the news. The family that boxes together stays together. A mother and daughter duo are getting in the ring and making a name for themselves. We have that story coming up after the break. Here's the rest of Friday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. -14 in Fort McMurray, -16 in Peace River, cloudy and -9 in Edmonton, -7 in Medicine Hat and Lethbridge, cloudy skies in the west coast, +5 in Campbell River, +6 in Port Hardy, -7 in Prince George, +4 in Prince Rupert. In Yukon, a cold -29 in Dawson City, -26 in Mayo. Over to NWT, -20 in Trout Lake and Fort Simpson, sunny and -27 in Ray Lakes, -21 in Fort McPherson and Inuvik, sunny and -25 in Sax Harbor. Sunny skies in Nunavut, -26 in Whale Cove, -29 in Baker Lake, -28 in Iqaluit, -28 in Clyde River. The Alliance Boxing Club in Edmonton is home to 3 women who are ready to become champions. In fact, the daughter of one of the fighters has dreams of Olympic glory. APTN's Chris Stewart visits these female fighters.
Vanessa Bradford has been boxing since she was 11 years old. At 33, she's been a 9-time provincial champion, been on the national team 3 times, and has fought 75 amateur fights. She's 4-0-2 as a pro and is ready to become a top contender.
It's always been a passion of mine. You know, every time I've come to the gym, you leave with a smile on your face. You feel good every time you're done working out. It's just, boxing is in my blood. It literally is in my blood, and I can't stay away from it.
Bradford says boxing was in her blood. Her dad competed as a boxer in the 1978 Commonwealth Games. Boxing helped Vanessa overcome the hardship of losing her father.
Like, I had a 4-year hiatus after my dad passed away. It was really hard, but the only thing that made me, you know, get over all that stuff and like the sadness, like depression, all that stuff was coming to the gym. Every time I came to the gym, I felt better every single day.
Sheena Flamond is from the Fishing Lake Métis settlement. She is undefeated as a pro. She is looking to capture the Canadian title. At 33, she knows the clock is ticking on title opportunities.
I started getting older and I'm like, you know what, I don't want to box forever. I know I can't box forever, so let's make some moves while I'm half young and while I can do it. So after a few fights in Edmonton, we decided I would turn pro, and I'm 5-0 as of right now.
Flamond introduced her daughter to the sport. At 16, Alexis has her sights set on the Nationals this year and the Olympics down the road. She says she enjoys the bonding with her mom as they train together.
Honestly, I like training with my mom. It's like, it's given us such a different relationship than most parents have with their kids.
But Sheena and her daughter can't fight in Edmonton. That's because the city has banned boxing and MMA events while they study the health effects. They will have to fight in another city unless the ban is lifted. John Mendoza is the owner of the Alliance Boxing Club. He is hopeful that they will soon once again allow them to do what they do, box.
Sheena and Vanessa are not old, but they're not young in this game anymore. So the window that these guys are pushing us to see through is getting closer and closer. So we really need Edmonton Commission to step up and let us fight.
Last year, I had 2 fights. So those were last year I said I was going to fight, and I fought twice. So I was really, really, really happy about that. And this year is I'm expecting such bigger things, like so many more big things. I'm very excited.
Chris Stewart, APTN National News, Edmonton.
Sometimes you just have to attack winter with everything you've got. A katana-wielding Tokyo resident looks to get his revenge on Mother Nature by taking out a couple of snow sculptures. Of course, what counts as cold in Tokyo isn't quite the same here in Canada. The low there today was -4, which made it the coldest day in the capital city of Japan in 48 years. Some talent. I don't recommend you doing that at home. That's your APTN National News for this Wednesday. Stay tuned for the latest episode of Nation to Nation. And for news anytime, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Brittany Hobson. Have a great night.